the stories would come out. So apparently, according to other journalists, we found out that there were a lot of porcupines probably told to the royals and even to Harry when they met her, and in order to cover up.
Talk to Andrew Morton, talk to Tom Bauer. All of these people that have written books about her have been like, it's a struggle to get to the truth of who this female was before she meets Prince Harry.
So all of these lies started coming out, but we didn't know that she had told the royal family so many porcupines.
The moment that leaked message surfaced, everything changed. Not slowly, not quietly. It hit like a shockwave, tearing straight through the carefully polished illusion of royal calm. Because this wasn't some random comment buried in a comment section or a blurry screenshot posted by an anonymous account chasing clout. This was different. This was precise. This was deliberate. A private message allegedly sent between two insiders with proximity to royal administrative circles, suggesting something that instantly made people freeze mid-scroll and reread the words twice just to make sure their eyes weren't playing tricks on them. Samantha Markle's Dina evidence, reviewed behind palace walls, not discussed, not dismissed, reviewed. That single word ignited a level of tension nobody was prepared for. Because reviewing something implies existence. It implies seriousness. It implies that whatever Samantha was holding wasn't just noise. It was enough to reach rooms most people will never see. Insert clip from...
And to be proud and to empower other women when she's out there using her platform. Be proud of who you are. Work hard. You don't have to pretend to be someone else. You don't have to dress like Diana. You don't have to say you got grants and scholarships. Give accolades to those who bring
0 to 0031. And suddenly, the narrative that had been running on autopilot for years began to wobble. Because for the longest time, Samantha Markle had existed in the public eye as an easy character to dismiss. The bitter sister, the outsider, the one critics claimed was chasing attention. But what happens when the person everyone was trained to ignore starts moving in silence, strategically, calmly, like someone who knows something the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet? What happens when whispers start surfacing suggesting her claims weren't just heard, but quietly evaluated in the very place built on protecting image above all else? That's when dismissal turns into discomfort. That's when confidence turns into quiet panic. Because behind the scenes, something was shifting. Not publicly, not with statements or press conferences, but in tone, in behavior, in silence. Insert clip from 0112 to 0128. For years, Meghan's public identity had been presented as airtight, carefully constructed, clean, inspirational. A narrative polished so thoroughly that every chapter flowed seamlessly into the next. But narratives built on perfection carry an invisible risk. Because perfection invites scrutiny. It invites curiosity. And curiosity doesn't need proof to start asking questions. It just needs one crack. One inconsistency, one moment that doesn't line up with the rest of the story. And Samantha Markle, whether intentional or not, had become the source of that crack. Not through loud accusations or chaotic outbursts, but through something far more dangerous. Precision, timing, silence. And then came the message. The one insiders allegedly tried to keep buried. The one suggesting Samantha's Dina submission had crossed an invisible line and entered a realm where speculation becomes something else entirely. Something heavier. Because reviewing Dina isn't casual. It isn't entertainment. It isn't gossip. It's verification. Insert clip from 0204 to 0210. And suddenly, the internet shifted from laughing to watching. Closely, carefully, because this wasn't just about Samantha anymore. This was about access. How did her evidence reach those walls? Who carried it? Who opened it? Who read it? And maybe most importantly, what did it say? Because Insiders didn't deny the existence of the message. They didn't confirm it either. They did something far more strategic. They stayed silent. And silence in situations like this never calms anything down. Silence feeds speculation. It gives it oxygen. It gives it room to grow into something far more powerful than a simple rumor. Insert clip from 0306 to 0334. And Samantha, watching all of this unfold, didn't rush forward. She didn't celebrate. She didn't deny it. She didn't clarify. She stayed exactly where she had been. Calm, measured, deliberate. Like someone who understood something the public didn't yet see. Like someone who knew timing was everything. Because when you hold information that could shift perception, you don't need to shout. You just need to wait. And that's when people started connecting dots they had ignored for years. Old interviews resurfaced. Forgotten remarks suddenly sounded different. Not because the words had changed, but because the context had. Because now there was a possibility, however faint, that Samantha wasn't just speaking into the void. She was speaking towards something. Insert clip from 0430 to 0448. Critics tried to shut it down immediately. They called it desperation, attention seeking, old resentment resurfacing in new packaging. But the problem with those arguments was timing. Because desperation is loud, it's chaotic, it's messy. And Samantha wasn't any of those things. She was controlled, focused, strategic, like someone following a sequence only she fully understood. And that made the situation far more unsettling. Because chaos is easy to dismiss, precision isn't. And then came the deeper layer. The speculation that the Dina evidence wasn't just symbolic, but specific. That it wasn't submitted randomly, but intentionally. That it wasn't ignored, but acknowledged behind closed doors. Not publicly, never publicly, but privately. Quietly, where image protection happens before statements ever reach daylight. Insert clip from 0548 to 0611. Within hours of the leak, timelines exploded. People weren't just discussing Samantha anymore. They were discussing process, protocol, royal procedures. Because if evidence had been reviewed, that meant it had been logged. If it had been logged, that meant it had been seen. And if it had been seen, that meant someone somewhere had made a decision about it. And that's when the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to tension. Because decisions leave traces, even when the public never sees them. And behind those palace walls where silence has always been the first line of defense, something had allegedly been examined. Something that wasn't meant for headlines. Something that wasn't meant for public consumption. Something that had crossed from rumor into review. And Samantha Markle never said a word. What made the leaked message even more unsettling wasn't just the suggestion that Samantha Markle's Dina evidence had been reviewed, it was the timing. Because it didn't surface during chaos. It didn't emerge in the middle of a media storm when everything already felt unstable. It appeared during calm, during one of those carefully curated stretches where the narrative felt back under control, where appearances were polished, where smiles were measured, where everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. And that's exactly why it hit harder. Because disruption inside stability feels intentional. It feels targeted. It feels like something slipped through that wasn't supposed to exist outside locked rooms. Behind the scenes, according to whispers circulating among royal observers and insiders who spoke in fragments instead of full sentences, the atmosphere reportedly shifted the moment the message was discovered. Not publicly. Publicly, nothing changed. Publicly, the image remained flawless. But privately, conversations allegedly began happening faster. Meetings became quieter, and responses became more cautious. Because when something as sensitive as Dina enters a conversation, even hypothetically, it forces attention in a way few other things can. Dina doesn't argue. Na doesn't speculate. Na simply exists. And that existence alone can make institutions built on narrative control extremely extremely uncomfortable. The most unsettling part wasn't what was confirmed. It was what wasn't denied. Because denial, especially strong denial, is usually immediate. Immediate denial shuts down speculation. It closes doors. It signals confidence. But silence. Silence signals uncertainty. Silence signals strategy. Silence signals that something is being evaluated before anyone decides how to respond. And that silence stretched longer than expected. Meanwhile, Samantha Markle remained exactly where she had always positioned herself. Not rushing forward, not retreating, just watching. Like someone who had already anticipated this moment. Like someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful move isn't revealing everything, it's allowing others to discover enough on their own to start asking the right questions. Because once questions begin, they rarely stop. Online, the reaction escalated into something far beyond casual curiosity. Amateur investigators began analyzing every available detail, not just about Samantha, but about timelines, dates, gaps, patterns, moments where public records felt incomplete or carefully sealed. Because the idea that Dina evidence had allegedly crossed into palace awareness suggested something deeper than random speculation. It suggested process. It suggested acknowledgement. It suggested that somewhere along the line, Samantha's claims had moved from background noise into something that required internal attention. And that's when attention shifted toward behavior. Not Samantha's behavior, but everyone else's. Because behavior reveals what words often conceal. Observers noticed subtle adjustments. Statements became more controlled. Appearances became more selective. Questions that once received casual dismissal were now met with careful deflection. Not confirmation, not denial, just deflection. The kind designed to avoid fueling something already too volatile to contain easily. Because the palace had always operated on one fundamental principle: control the narrative, shape perception, maintain stability. But Dina exists outside narrative. Dina doesn't care about public image. It doesn't care about headlines. It doesn't care about carefully crafted biographies. It simply reflects truth at its most unfiltered level. And even the suggestion that such evidence had been privately reviewed created a level of tension no press release could immediately erase. Speculation intensified around what that review might have involved. Was it verification? Was it dismissal? Was it precaution? Nobody knew. Nobody outside those walls had access to those answers. But uncertainty itself became the driving force. Because uncertainty leaves space, and space invites interpretation, and interpretation spreads faster than confirmation ever could. Some insiders, speaking cautiously and never on record, hinted that the review wasn't about public disclosure. It was about internal clarity, understanding potential vulnerabilities before they could become external crises. Because institutions built on legacy don't wait for problems to explode, they anticipate them. They prepare for them. They evaluate risks long before anyone else realizes those risks exist. And Samantha, once again, didn't interrupt the process. She didn't issue statements demanding validation. She didn't pressure anyone publicly. She allowed the silence to work. Because silence, when used strategically, can create more pressure than confrontation ever could. It forces attention inward. It forces evaluation. It forces decisions to be made behind closed doors, where outcomes are determined long before the public hears anything official. Supporters of Meghan dismissed everything as recycled rumor, insisting that speculation had always surrounded her family dynamics and that none of it had ever materialized into verified reality. They argued that the leaked message was likely exaggerated, misinterpreted, or entirely fabricated by individuals seeking attention. And their arguments carried weight, because without official confirmation, nothing existed beyond suggestion, beyond implication, beyond possibility. But critics focused on something else entirely. Not what had been proven, but what had been acknowledged. Because the mere idea that Samantha's Dina evidence had allegedly already been reviewed suggested that her claims hadn't been dismissed immediately. That alone changed perception, because dismissal implies certainty, review implies consideration, and consideration implies uncertainty. The psychological impact of that shift couldn't be overstated, because public narratives rely on confidence. Confidence reassures audiences. Confidence stabilizes perception. But uncertainty destabilizes everything. It introduces doubt. It creates questions that don't disappear easily. And once doubt enters the conversation, it rarely leaves quietly. Observers began asking different kinds of questions, not explosive questions, subtle ones. Questions about timing, about silence, about why certain topics were never addressed directly. Questions about whether the review had resulted in closure or simply deeper internal discussion. Questions nobody outside those walls could answer. Questions that existed without resolution. And through it all, Samantha Markle remained silent. Not defensive, not aggressive, just present, watching the narrative evolve around her without interfering. Because sometimes the most powerful position isn't proving something, it's allowing others to realize that proof might exist. Behind palace walls, whatever had been reviewed stayed there. No official acknowledgement, no official dismissal, just silence. Strategic, controlled silence. And in the world of royal image management, silence has always meant one thing above everything else. Something happened. Something was seen. And whatever it was never meant to leave those walls, to leave those walls, to leave those walls, to leave those walls.